All right, now I have a Costco rotisserie chicken that I have taken all of the meat off of, and it ended up that I started with a chicken that weighed, with its packaging, 4.3 pounds, and I ended up with 2.6 pounds of pure meat. And so I'm going to set this aside. This is part of another project. But what I want to show you is what to do from there after you've stripped off the meat if you want to make bone broth. And bone broth is being promoted as being very healthful and a great base for soup, and it really is, and it's super easy to make. There's no reason to purchase it when it's so readily available. So in the bottom of my container from my Costco chicken, there's this jelly looking stuff, and what that is proteins that were dissolved in cooking and have congealed in the bottom of the pan. Now if it was fat, it would be a different color, it would be white, but this is not white, it's brown, and so that is protein that is suspended in some water. So I'm going to put that right off the bat into my bone broth pot, because that's exactly what we want to get out of the rest of the skin and the bones. And so this is everything else that came out of that Costco chicken. The bones, the skin, and that lovely flavor that gets into those rotisserie chickens is still contained in this skin. So that's a reason I don't really want to eat it, because it's high in fat and you don't need that extra fat, and so but I do want to capture the flavor. So I'm going to cover it with 2 quarts of water, and the goal is to have about an inch of water over the top of the bones. But 2 quarts is just about the perfect amount. Now I'm going to cover it, put it on the stove, simmer it for an hour, and then it's going to be a perfect bone broth. I'll show you when I'm done with it. All right, the bones and skins from that rotisserie chicken have been simmering for about an hour now. Once they got to a good simmer, I took the lid off so that they would cook off some of the liquid, just because I want it to be a little bit more concentrated so that it fits in my refrigerator better. But it is going to be quite concentrated as far as chicken broth goes. So the next step, I've got this little concoction that doesn't look all that appetizing, so I'm going to strain out the bones and the skin and everything else that is the remains of that rotisserie chicken carcass. And I'm putting it into a bowl with a spout so that I can dispense it into my quart jars more readily. Now the advantage to putting it into a quart jar while it's still hot, and I'm going to put the lid on, is that the lid will seal. Now that doesn't mean that it can be stored on the shelf. So anything with meat in it has to be stored in the refrigerator unless it's pressure canned, but it will seal, which will also help it have a long life and remain good for use in the refrigerator. So I recommend using a quart jar and with a 2-piece lid, and filling the jar while it's still hot. So, whoops, I wanted that there. Now there is a layer of fat that is going to that's on the top of this broth, but once the broth is cool, and it can be in the refrigerator for that matter, as long as you want to keep it, with up to a month or so, but that fat will rise to the top and you can pick it off when you go to use it, but you don't need to skim it off or try to get rid of it at this point. Alright, so this is going to gel in the refrigerator, and so when you pour it out, it's going to be kind of a thick broth, but it will melt very, very readily. It's almost pure liquid at room temperature, but in the refrigerator it will have kind of a jelly consistency, and that's what you want, because that's the proteins making their links together, and this is just absolutely loaded with protein. So I'm going to let this cool down a little bit just before I put it in the refrigerator. Just one last thing I thought you might be interested in. This is the bone broth that I made from a Costco rotisserie chicken. You can see it has this little layer of fat up here at the top. This one is whiter than this one because this one is cool and this one is still hot. This is the bone broth made from the chicken thighs and the chicken legs together, and you can see the chicken legs and the chicken thighs have a lot more fat in them, and so the bone broth that they render is much fattier. And I'm not sure that it will show up well on camera, but the separation between the broth and the fat is right here. So I would say that there's quadruple the fat in the thighs and legs as there is in the bone broth from just the regular rotisserie chicken that includes the whole chicken. If you were using white meat, just using the breast alone, you would have so little that it would barely show up at all. So that's just a little note that you're going to get more yield from the leaner meats, and using a rotisserie chicken you're going to get this very high quality broth with very little fat in it. So it's just good to know. I hope that you will come and visit Beth's Happy Home often. Thanks for watching.